Topic three. Up front, we've been having some technical hiccups and whatnot. So Allie has moved. So when we cut to her in a second, you're going to see her in a new location, and she put on a little sweater or two. It looks like so. Topic three. Allie, you wanted to talk about politics, right?
Sure, yeah.
Which is quite fitting because, God willing, the day this part of the episode airs would be Wednesday, the day after the big presidential election here in the States. And fingers crossed, we are welcoming President Hillary Clinton into the White House and not Trump. But yeah, I love that you wanted to talk about politics about this because you are certainly one of the most outspoken political proponents that I see in my feed on Twitter and in social media, and I love it because you're Canadian and are more informed than myself, I'm sure, and 99% of Americans that are going to actually be voting.
I know.
For
it's a little
in this
weird.
election.
It's a little strange. And people probably don't even realize that I'm Canadian because I'm constantly tweeting about my friends in the States and U.S. politics. But yeah, I can't even vote in your country, and yet I follow your election process religiously. I think it's just because, I don't know, Canadians, I think a lot of Canadians are like that. I think a lot of us even understand the American political system better than we do the Canadian system, just because your media is such a huge... It's very entertaining. Watching CNN compared to watching Canadian news. Our news isn't as flashy. It's not as exciting. It's not as ridiculous. It's just kind of very calm and stable and not very entertaining. I think our biggest story for a while here has been an American actor who lives in Toronto is rumored to be dating Prince Harry. And that is big news for us. We got all our journalists trying to figure out if they're really dating, and we're investigating our Instagram. I've been seeing this all the time. Oh my God, do we not have... And there's also a little bit
because you guys had
politics,
it was a big scandal in our media, at least, was Rob Ford. Am I remembering correctly?
Yeah,
his
that
name?
was one time where a Canadian mayor really hit the mainstream.
You guys had your own Trump.
He was, in a way, although, a little more, even, I guess, equally crazy, probably. So I'm very interested in U.S. politics, just because, again, they are so influential, and a lot of you guys kind of tell me, oh, maybe I should pay more attention to Canadian politics, and I'm like, it's really all right, just because, the States is the world's biggest superpower. And so I think it's important that we kind of all, in some respects, pay attention to what's going on in the United States, just as I think you should pay attention to what's going on in Russia and with their relations and what's going on with China, just because it affects more than just the United States, whereas Canadian politics is very just... It's internal. It really only affects kind of what's going on in our country, though. I mean, there's nothing wrong with learning about other countries. And I think if you want to understand what other countries are doing well, for example, I do wish in many respects that more Americans would take a hard look at Canadian healthcare, for example, and see what's working there, because we do have universal healthcare and it does work very well. I've never had to really pay for a doctor.
So it's nice. It's nice knowing that we only have to worry about Justin Trudeau being the hot prime minister. And that's all we need to care about.
Exactly.
Because us Americans, we're not gonna invest in really delving too much deeper into anything non-American, because America, which is I joke about it, but it is a frustrating, and I'm just as much a victim to it, in that I when your guys' elections are coming up, I'll see it in our news occasionally if there isn't a big story going on our end of the world.
Right.
I'll see it. So yeah, I remember following a little bit Trudeau, but even that, my entry point was basically through John Oliver talking about it on Last Week Tonight or something, and doing an extended segment on kind of, hey, this is what your neighbors to the north are voting on, and it's important for them, so you should probably be good neighbors and know what's going on. But I totally get that perspective of and I see it intensely in the Kind of Funny Facebook group, because we have people going crazy with political posts and stuff, and then we have such a large non-American audience that are constantly coming in and being like, I don't like, many being like, I don't know what the hell's going on, what is wrong with you people? And then others who are trying to be informed and aware of like America's place on the world stage, because we do kind of occasionally act as like the world policeman. And so what we do certainly does affect most of the rest of the world. So we're not quite we're certainly not as isolated as certain aspects and certain political parties would like to wish we were.
Sure.
But how so? And you volunteered in the political realm
I have. I worked on Justin Trudeau's campaign for the leader of the party that he was eventually elected prime minister as. So I worked on his campaign in downtown Toronto, making phone calls and running the phone helpline for voters. And I met him. It was great. It was awesome. It was when I first kind of decided that I wanted to do more than just science. I wanted to kind of start pursuing, law and politics, and so I worked on his campaign. It was great.
Nice. What kind of? I assume you did that as you line up more politically. So yes. You kind of went to his side of the the aisle. But so what? Like, how did that go? I guess. How did you take those steps to get more involved? It
was fairly easy because just at the virtue of the college that I am at, I had a lot of friends who are very well connected. For example, one of my close friends of someone who I was dating at the time, his mother was a member of parliament. So, there's just a lot of connections. The young liberals at our college is populated a lot with people from my college, specifically at a university, from people at my college. And someone was just like, hey, we're looking for interns at Justin Trudeau's campaign. And so I Facebook messaged someone, and then a day later got the call that I was working there. So it was kind of just like a very easy connection. It's like, oh, I'm working there the next day. So then I was like, okay, just go into the office and start working.
Well, there you go. Yeah. The closest I ever got was in high school, pretty much because I had a crush on a girl. I got involved in the Teenage Republicans.
Okay.
And this is before I cared about really politics.
Sure.
Though at the time this was 2000, so like we had John McCain, who's our state senator, one of our state senators, and he was running in the primaries up against George W. Bush, and so on that side of things, I ultimately still would have leaned towards Gore, and I wasn't able to vote then, but like in the primary run up, I much preferred like McCain to a Bush at the time, because he was right. That was in the days where like John McCain was more of a maverick senator, so he did kind of play more down the middle aisle, or he would go across the aisle and work with both parties, as opposed to the hyper politicized partisan politics that we now kind of suffer from here in the States.
McCain is a far better candidate than what we currently have.
Yes, but even he, like when he ran in 2008, he leaned into the same kinds of crowds that Trump kind of relies on. So that's where he definitely lost me. Even at like
associating with Sarah Palin, it was just,
anybody else like aside from Obama, I probably would have considered McCain still, had McCain stayed more centralist than the kind of the right fringes that he played up to. That so many of the Republican Party are somewhat forced to play up to now to get through the primary process, which is frustrating. But hopefully, one of these days they completely have to realize they got to do something new. Because I grew up in a very Republican, conservative, fiscally conservative, socially liberal family, and me being the social liberal, and like I'm still somewhat fiscally conservative, but the social liberalness outweighs all of that. So I'm like one of the black sheep of the family. So
Sure.
like my parents, I don't know if they ended up voting for Trump, or if they went third party or just abstained. But like I know my grandfather and I, who's hardline conservative, even though in the primary process, we were talking about how ridiculous it was that Trump was where he was, and he was looking at people like Carly Fiorina or something as kind of who he would have preferred, or John Kasich, and then my family is having like my parents are going on a cruise, so we're not gonna have like family Thanksgiving together here in late November as we Americans do. So we're actually having it next week. We're having it early while everybody's still in town, and so it's the first time I'm going to have talked to my grandfather in months, and I'm not looking forward to whatever the outcome is,
Right.
and having to kind of dive down the political well with him, and that's only because he has all day to sit and read politics and read news, and I don't have that luxury to educate myself as much as I would like. I'm certainly one of the more informed members of my family and among my friends, but even that, I'm like, I take a measured approach. So if somebody comes at me and says, blah, 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 here's this crazy policy, and I don't know enough to comment on the policy, I'm going to say, well, let me do the research and get back to you on it, because I'm not going to fly off the cuff and not respond to something I don't have all the information on. Whereas my grandfather will just spout whatever he hears kind of off of like a Fox News or something like that.
Yeah.
And it becomes like a bombardment of overwhelming, often racist rhetoric. And I'm like, I could respond to this, but I'm not going to do it because it would be a passionate response, and I want to stay in the will. So those are like the obstacles I find myself running into.
Sure.
But I certainly do, like you and I, a lot through the debates would like be live tweeting kind of our responses to debates, and that was certainly one of the things that stood out in our interactions in recent months, because like you're tweeting things out basically like right before I could say the exact same thing, and I'm like, good for Allie, because like she has no direct horse in this race, but she knows more than half the people that are going to vote easily.
Yeah.
So what, like, are you like a student of politics, and you that you just want to kind of be versed in what's going on, or is it like out of necessity because you know how much we do kind of rely on things?
Yeah, I guess I've just always been driven. This is kind of coming from, I'm writing my law school personal statement, so I'm really going back into my history and really thinking about what motivates me and what are my thoughts and what are my philosophies that have motivated me. And I've always been driven generally by the pursuit of truth and justice. So I believe that truth naturally precedes the administration of justice. So if we want to have a just society, then we need to know, and we need to understand as much as possible. So understanding as much of the political process as possible is necessary in order to combat things that are ugly and gross and nasty, and you arm yourself with the knowledge, and then you use that understanding to deliver an informed critique, as you were talking about. I'm continuously shocked by the amount of people who just take facts or take things that politicians say at face value. It's probably one of the worst things that you can do, or just what the media tells you or whatever. It's just, I'm shocked by the amount of people who just parrot facts or just say, I don't like Hillary's tax policy or whatever, without actually ever looking at her tax policy and just repeating what people are telling you. So arming yourself with that knowledge and then using that to combat the ugliness that can come from it, I think I've just always been driven by. So it is a necessity, and the fact that, I don't know, it's just part of my soul. It's just part of who I am as a human. It's why I studied science in school. It's just continuously trying to understand things and gain knowledge, and then to use that for the betterment of people. And a lot of people are really impacted by what politicians do, and I think we always think of, and another part of me, is really advocates for the fact that I think that democracy is what happens in between elections, and I think that elections are generally a show. and that in order for real change to happen, people need to, I mean, vote, sure, but don't think that just by voting you are actually contributing that much, because you're not. The real contributions come from continuously fighting for structural reform and structural changes, and for changes, you know, for Black people, particularly in America, is one issue that's just, the treatment is horrible right now, and I think we need to continue fighting for that no matter who is elected. So continuously informing ourselves on what people do and holding people accountable. I mean, people spend far too much time, I think, worrying about tweeting something, you know, getting angry at, like, even video game developers. Like, just, why do you waste so much time tweeting shit at people in the video game industry or celebrities or whatever? Why are you so obsessed with what Justin Bieber is doing and shit talking him? Whereas, like, Trump or Clinton or something, they're running for the highest office, you should know what they're doing and you should criticize them at every step in order to get real change for real people. Because at the end of the day, as much as politics is kind of a broken system, that is the only system that is actually doing things that are really impacting you. So laws are being passed and things are actually happening there. I mean, it's happening very slowly and in a very inefficient way, but nowhere else. You writing a tweet or you writing a Facebook message, think of this as kind of like what you said. That's not changing anything. That's not actually voting. That's part of staying informed. It's a very important part of staying informed. But at the end of the day, the laws are being passed by these crazy people that we've essentially let in and that are now like running things. And so you always need to watch these people and to be informed in the process. And it's just, I'm weird in that I'm just very driven by my ideology. I'm very ideologically driven, so I'm very driven by these philosophies, and that is what I work towards, and that is what I strive towards, and it's just a fundamental part of my psyche, and so that's why I do it.
Nice. Yeah, I love the sentiment of democracy being between elections, especially because one of the most frustrating things living in the American system is that everybody just puts everything on the presidency, and it's
Right.
not. It's like that's one person. Yes, they admittedly are like the one person of one of the three branches, but that's also of the federal government. So you also need to be active in your local politics, your city, state politics,
Absolutely, yeah.
and the congressional and senatorial races, which that's where. The one of my favorite pieces that I've seen in this whole election cycle was a couple segments that Samantha Bee did on her new show, basically talking about how the most important election was back in 2010 because we got Obama and then everybody became complacent, and
Yep.
in the states, the 2010 election, Republicans came in and swept a whole bunch
I
of
remember
stuff,
that. Yeah.
and they took
And
a
they
lot
got control,
of
yeah.
state houses, and they took a lot of governorships because
Yeah.
Democrats historically have significantly lower turnout in like midterm elections. And the problem with doing that in 2010 is that every 10 years is when our census updates, and that's when all of districts are redrawn. So now everybody, like, the system has across so many of our states been like gerrymandered and in many ways the rigged system that Donald Trump continues to rail on about is not rigged in the favor that he thinks it's rigged in. It's rigged in the Republicans'
It's
favor.
not. It is,
because they were kind of in power when things got redrawn and districts got redrawn, so they were able to kind of draw the maps to their liking.
Exactly.
And so now so many more more districts are safe districts for them, and now we've got just that kind of level of incumbency
Sure.
amped up because of something like that. And it was because people, we were talking a little bit before we started recording. I saw a show last night called The Trump Card about like the life of Donald Trump and his celebrity and where he's at now. And a big feeling of it was the fact that like as it's speaking to a liberal audience because it knows you're in the theater, and that is typically a liberal audience. And so it's speaking truth to that audience of, hey, you guys were complicit in this, most likely. You know, you might have been active or you might have done something, but you like sat by and watched a lot of this happen. And that is something that really resonated with me in that show. because I think about like the 2000, let's see, 2004 was my first election that I could vote in, and I have voted in every election since then, including like the midterms and whatnot, because I'm fortunate in that I live in an area where like my like I am in like a liberal pocket of the Phoenix area, so my candidates are also winning, and I'm not
Right.
like in a swing position
Sure.
where I can like sway things one way or the other. But I want to keep it that way, so I know I need to stay active and vote for those people. And so yeah, it's that mentality of even that, like even between those elections, calling congressmen or senators and saying, hey, please vote for this act, and like knowing what's going on. And that's where I admittedly fall short. One of my friends that you and I have talked about a little bit through instant messaging, a friend of mine, Rachel, who you are like so weirdly in sync with one another at times.
Right.
That you're basically like, she's your American doppelganger. And she's super active, and will like, she would tell me and be like, hey, like, if you don't mind, if you're not doing anything, like call your state representative and just tell them to co-sign this bill and whatnot. And I'll be like, okay, sure. Like I'll do a little bit of research first to make sure it is something that actually want. And it'll be something like, hey, we want to give like support to like we want to give like food support in Africa. Oh yeah, that's a good thing. I want to go ahead and support that. So like I'll call up my representative and say just a quick like message, because if you call, they have to actually like log it, and it has to go somewhere.
Yeah, I mean it matters. Yeah, the people have immense power. It's just I don't think that we really realize it or really know how to use it, and it's in politicians' vested interest, or at least some of their vested interest, to keep it that way. Especially, there's a whole thing of like you're talking about gerrymandering, and just like not making it much harder for people to vote, so they don't have the proper identification, and then people can't vote. Like, it's just, it's hard. I mean, we have these huge systems operating very abstractly, and people want change. People want things to work. Donald Trump is not that change. Even though he's selling himself as that change, as the outsider. And for people who are not inclined to vote for Clinton, again, going back to the fact that it's not just the presidency, this election is just as much about the Supreme Court, I think, as it is about the presidency. And it's about that next nominee and who that nominee is going to be. And that will really sway a lot of decisions. If you have an understanding of how the Supreme Court works, voting in different justices and their political alignments really matter, and so having a Democratic nominee for the Supreme Court really matters. So it's not just about Clinton, it's about the platform, and it's about also the Supreme Court. So I would encourage everyone who doesn't like Clinton but are still generally pro what the Democrats usually stand for, to consider those two issues as well.
Yeah, certainly. And as I touched on at the beginning, by the time this is going live for anybody, it's too late.
Never mind.
You've doomed us all, but...
So you should have considered, and the next time consider.
Yeah. And that, yeah, absolutely. My concern and my frustration, and there is a sense of helplessness in... Like, I totally get where people who are disenfranchised with the system and feel that that the political parties and the political gridlock have ruined things. I feel that too. And even like in the reality of my day to day, especially as a white privileged male, my life is not routinely affected negatively or positively by the day-to-day workings or failings of the government. But again, going back to like the empathy note, I'll have a debate with my family when we're talking about like the Black Lives Matter movement, and I will try and break through my parents' implicit, not malicious racism, but it's their institutional biases, and I will say, I can walk down the street in a hoodie and I don't have to worry about getting shot.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to worry about that at all because of the complexion of my skin, whereas other people do. And that is something that I think this country needs to acknowledge and work to correct. And the fact that they'll sit there and say, well, no, there's more gangs in Phoenix. There's more white gangs in Phoenix or something. They'll spout something, a very micro level argument at me, and I will try and constantly combat and say that's the very smallest of pictures in a wide spectrum. Yes, of course, most of the gangs in Scottsdale are white because most of Scottsdale is white. That doesn't, like, your argument kind of falls flat there. I'm also not going to get shot in Scottsdale.
Right.
So it's not whether I'm wearing a hoodie or not. It's not something I'm absolutely in a point of privilege where I don't have to worry about that. But again, like our conversation kind of in the gaming culture, I am empathetic to the movements that do have to deal with that. I remember it was one of the most surreal experiences last year going to I was in the line to go through airport security on my way to San Francisco for IGN's house party last year for their Beyond 400 Unlocked 200 celebration when the Supreme Court ruling came down for in support of gay marriage.
Right.
And going to San Francisco
Wow.
during Pride Week, because it was
Wow.
also it happened to be Pride Week. Like being in San Francisco and going and seeing the Pride Parade in the shadow of that monumental decision.
Yeah.
Like it was intensely powerful being around that, even though that in my day-to-day life doesn't affect
would have
anything.
no impact, but you can still feel empathy for the people who are still struggling and still address that there are very deep problems in many aspects of your country that need to be addressed, particularly the Black community, and then, with gay marriage up until the Supreme Court ruling, which thankfully made the right decision. Yeah, absolutely. And it's so important because I think the best thing that you could do with your life as a person of privilege is reflect and figure out ways in which you can give back. Because what else are you going to do? Just sit around enjoying your privilege? Okay.
I mean, it is nice. My privilege is nice. It has afforded me many opportunities that I absolutely, like, I've always been a weirdly, I don't know, but like 10 plus years ago is when my work with Stray Cat Theater got started, the theater that I went and saw the Trump card last night, because their director came and like worked with me on a show at ASU, and I in kind went and saw his work that he was doing in his own company and immediately got like hooked and immediately started donating them. And like I'm a poor college student working like a minimum wage job basically, and I was giving them hundreds of dollars a year to help like support the art. So I've always been like very philanthropic in that regard, and I don't know necessarily why I'm wired that way, but like I try and spread my privilege in that sense when I can, if I can, so that others will have the opportunity to experience those things. And
right.
In something like theater, absolutely, it's like I absolutely acknowledge and can recognize that, yeah, it's a privileged art form medium, so that like most of my money is still going to support other white people for the most part. But Stray Cat in particular, I like supporting, and in because they do politically relevant work, they do socially relevant work. One of the shows they did a couple years ago was a play called The Brothers' Size. 3 African American characters talking about like the struggles of being African American and trying to survive in a very like racist community that admittedly, like one of them had just come out of jail for a crime he had committed as like a youth or something, and but he's like, there aren't any white actors in the show, but the characters themselves like role play as the white actors, and so you see like the very stereotypical like southern racist sheriff that's abusing them because they share a complexion. So you've got like the good upright brother, and then you've got the brother who's trying to rebuild his life, and they get they just get like harassed, and it was a very powerful show that was significantly lacking in the rest of this community. The theater I used to work at just did In the Heights, which is was very politically relevant in the sense that it was Lin-Manuel Miranda, who does Hamilton. It was his first Broadway show.
Right.
And it's like it's Dominican Republic, Puerto Ricans. It's people in Washington Heights. So it's very few, if any, white people in that show, in that cast.
Right.
And it is diverse voices that you don't normally get to hear in the mainstream. So those are the kinds of things that I try to support, and unfortunately I do know that like even Hamilton, it's a very powerful story, but it's right now it's still a very privileged, powerful story that mostly white audiences are having to pay thousands of dollars to go see.
Yeah.
So it will be significantly more important when it's released and can be done in high schools and in communities that can put on their own version of those shows because of the political discourse that I think can kind of come from hearing those other voices.
Very true.
Yeah, that was a slight derail from politics as politics, but
Still.
so like do you see, because we talked earlier about like the 3 months or whatever I flirted with the idea of being a lawyer. In the same vein, I flirted with the idea of running for politics. I've always joked I'll be 35 in 2020, so I could theoretically run for president in the next election.
Right.
So vote Snarky Starkey in 2020. But do you have an interest in maybe trying to pursue politics? Like law being one of the primary and most seemingly successful like foots in the door of the political spectrum.
Yeah, if it wasn't for, because politics again is just a reflection of wanting to change the world. So it's like politics and policy, more so policy. I mean, politics is what kind of the maneuvering around the creation of policy. But policy is the distillation of everything in society, like all of our knowledge and all of our beliefs and ethics and thoughts, and it's the creation of, into bills and laws and things that will create actual change. So yeah, I've always wanted to. I've never really thought about it concretely, but it's always kind of been there, and I think it's always been driven me. I would love to, I want to work. I don't want to work in corporate law. I want to work in something in the public interest as a public servant, either as like a crown prosecutor for, that's what we call like just crowns is for, because in Canada we're advocating on behalf of the Queen.
Yeah, you still got
so
that
crown
queen and
attorney. Yeah, a crown attorney, or as more of like crown attorney, and then or if I could work, as a lawyer for the government, or eventually influence policy in some way. That is, I mean, I don't know where my career will take me, just because it is huge. There are so many thoughts, but I mean, that's always been kind of a driving force in the back of my mind. It's just kind of a natural fit, again, with the things that I want to pursue in terms of social justice and the way my mind works, which is just very academic. So I like the idea, some people are similarly driven by the pursuit of truth and justice, but they, become a doctor or become, an advocate, and they go work in third world countries, things like that. I'm an academic, but I'm also similarly driven by, the pursuit of social justice. So politics and actually effecting real change when it comes to reading dense documents and strategizing and distilling ideas from a bunch of different disciplines, I think I would just be naturally suited for, I'd be a good fit for. So studying the law and becoming a lawyer is one way to advocate for the beliefs of people, essentially, and advocate for clients, and learning how to do that, and then maybe eventually advocating for a constituency It's a very hard thing to do. It's hard as a woman. It's hard as someone who's not rich and didn't go to private schools. It's very hard to do, but it would never be off the table for me. So it is, yeah. I mean, I have a long career ahead of me. So, yeah. But I mean, that's always been in the back of my mind.
Well, I look forward to coming up to Canada and visiting, getting a tour of the Prime Minister's residence when you're there in like 3 years.
Sure.
Coming to hang out and being like, yeah, she was on Trove Talk, this dumb little podcast I did way back in the day. Prime Minister Mushka.
Yeah.
Awesome. Any last touchstones? Any last points we want to kind of bring up in politics outside of just go out and vote? Obviously, it's too late for this election, but go out and vote when you can.
Go out and vote. Go out and do things in between elections. Like never stop fighting. There are a lot of distractions in our society today. There's a lot of social media, a lot of like you can watch anything you want on Netflix. You can watch movies. You can watch anything. But the creators who are creating these works of art that we're so fond of, even video games, there's a political message in them. Some people really rail against that. They think that games are just games and leave politics out of it. But every artist, I think, in a form has a deeply like political ideas about something, and they're conveying that to you, and I think that you should fight for real change. I know a lot of people are doing the extra life stuff this weekend, and like that's a great way. I mean, that's not politics, but that is kind of a social effort to get involved and to give back to the community, and that's really all what politics is. And I think that we as a generation have kind of left the idea of politics because we think of it as broken and an old system, and we are doing new social campaigns online through like Patreon and like through Kickstarter and all that stuff, and it's great. But I think that at the end of the day, a lot of important decisions are being made in these stuffy old corridors of power, and we need to, as much as we like just doing video games and all that stuff, we need to turn our eyes sometimes to those systems to kind of revolutionize them and help change them. And it's not flashy, it's not sexy, it's not immediate. Change like that will not become immediate, but it takes a lot of hard work. But I encourage you to just keep your eye on things, and always think critically and fight for real change in a virtual world.
Excellent. I love, yes.
That's my political slogan.
But recognize that a tweet isn't necessarily going to cut it.
Right.
I remember like one of the few times I've really gotten into, like I've gotten bombarded with like Gamergate kind of people yelling at me who I don't know or anything, is I made a tweet at some point about like, God, I wish Gamergaters cared as much about like ethics in politics as they did about ethics in journalism.
Yeah.
Because then their voices might actually like mean something.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, I'm like, oh, but their voices are really scary, and they're angry for all the wrong reasons.
They would be They would be the people yelling like, "Lock her up!" and Hillary. That's like the alt-right, the angry people. But I mean, you're completely right, because it is such a delusional pursuit of justice that they're doing to care about. I mean, it's not important, and that is something that I kind of struggle with, because I do believe in the power of art, as I think you and I both do, to create social change. You with your background in theater, and now as a video game writer, absolutely there's power in art that, science or whatever, like these other things are important. Science, politics, economics are important, but art plays an important role for people to understand social justice. Like Hamilton, again, has great message about social justice and is going to change a lot of people's lives, and that's amazing. Like video games are going to change a lot of people's lives, and they have the power to do that too. But at the end of the day, for me, becoming a video game journalist maybe is just not where I see myself best contributing to social justice. And so that's why I've kind of, flirted back and forth with the idea of, doing the video game thing or doing the law thing. And when I've kind of, I think, hopefully settled on the law thing, because I believe that that's the best way, for me at least, to change things. And I'm not saying that that's the best way for everyone, but yeah, the Gamergaters are delusional. TLDR, that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, definitely. Great. I think that can kind of close out politics.
Yeah.
one of the most serious of the topics we've actually had on the show so far, and I thank you so much for
No problem,
for
yeah.
bringing it to the table and us getting to have kind of the conversation, because I love the topic and I love discussing it with people, even if it's discussing it with people that I disagree with. I enjoy the conversation, and it's a conversation that we can't have over social media, and it's like because it's you can't argue 140 characters at a time, and I recognize that, but so many people don't, and they think they're going to get their message across, and it's too the ideas are too big to fit within a tweet or a series of tweets, or kind of the idea of like a big social media post. So many people just and I fall victim to it too. I'm posting to speak to the people who are already like-minded like me. I'm not like changing minds when I do that.
Right.
That's going to be something that has to be a conversation, or it has to be experienced. And I recognize that, and that's why like I will debate with somebody over like a tweet or two, but then I'm going to say, hey, like I can't do this in like bite-sized chunks, so we can take this, into like DMs or something, and like let's hash it out there. And not only are we like then avoiding, making everything we're like putting everything through the public lens of a Twitter or something like that, but also we can just have a conversation about it and not just fire back quick little sound bites. And I think that's part of I definitely think social media has helped kind of add to the cynicism of especially like our generation in the conversation,
Right.
Because it is all soundbite driven these days, and it isn't people, like you said earlier, people aren't doing the research. They're speaking to a policy they know nothing about because they haven't actually looked at it. They've just said, well, I saw this meme that said this, so that must have been true, so I'm going to continue spouting that.
Yeah, it's sad and it's frightening. Like, what do we do about this generation of people who are growing up on just reading, small bite-sized tweets, or, our society is becoming more and more like based on infographics and like, and so what do we do about all this policy that's being passed, and it's like dense, and like there's a lot of reading involved, and you have to, and no one's being trained with that. So what do we do? There's such a disconnect between what's actually going on.
I will say though, on that, like this generation versus past generations, there's always an uninformed portion of the electorate.
It's true.
And this is the new way that we can see and identify those people. But like my aunt, and I've given her crap for this for let's see, since '92, since I was like 7, because she was going to vote for Ross Perot in the 1992 election, and I remember 7-year-old Trevor not knowing anything, but knowing that, well, you should vote for George Bush because that's who Mom and Dad are voting for,
right?
And she didn't really know why she was voting for Ross Perot. She couldn't argue it, and she couldn't articulate it. And like every election since then there has been a huge, like, she, as a member of an older generation, votes largely in lockstep with whoever my grandmother tells her to vote for and says who she should vote for. And so that's been like that. She doesn't know why. She just votes for.
It's true. Yeah.
Whoever somebody else has told her to vote for.
Yeah.
And it's not unique to our generation. It's not new to our generation. And I was listening to NPR not too long ago, and they were talking about studies that show that historically, just when you're 20 to 35, you're just not as politically active. It's not this generation. It was last generation. It was the baby boomers when they were in that age. You don't get invested in politics because you're still in the I'm invincible phase of your life, and nothing that the world does can affect me.
Sure.
And so that's what most of us are dealing with, and most of my parents' generation and their parents' generation were dealing with in that span of time. And then once you kind of grow out of that, so we are certainly kind of odd ducks in that regard, that we try and be as informed as we can be, and as active as we can be. But it's not a new thing that 20-somethings and millennials just don't care about politics in the same way that baby boomers did.
Right.
No,
that's true. I agree.
Turnout is always low in that age because of everything else that people in that age range are looking at.
Right.
We might even be like higher because everybody is so disenfranchised and looking for something to do. I mean, you might see an uptick in third-party support, or you see people like Bernie Sanders coming into the conversation that 4 years ago or 8 years ago or 12 years ago wouldn't have had a shot because of our generation looking for things outside the norm of politics.
Right.
But yeah, it's not new. It is like cycles repeating, just like Dark Souls.
Yeah.
Tying it all together.
Yeah, exactly.
Good job. All right, on that note, since I'm not going to top that,